The second Shaq stepped onto the yacht club's private dock, the air shifted. Conversations halted. Champagne glasses hovered mid-sip. Every pair of entitled eyes locked onto him. Then, a sharp, icy voice sliced through the silence. "What is that doing here?" Shaq turned, eyebrows raised. A woman draped in designer silk and arrogance glared at him over her oversized sunglasses. "This is a private club. We have standards." She snapped her fingers, her lips curling into a smirk. "Call security, now!" Oh, she had no idea what she just started. "All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from." Shaq stepped onto the private dock, the sun glinting off the endless stretch of luxury yachts lined up before him. The air smelled of salt and money, old money, the kind that didn't welcome outsiders. The soft hum of conversation dulled as heads turned. Champagne glasses paused midair. A few people whispered behind manicured hands. Others simply stared, their expressions unreadable but their intent clear. "He doesn't belong here." Then came the voice that cut through the silence like a blade. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me." Madeline Sinclair, draped in a silk cover-up over her designer swimsuit, pulled off her sunglasses with an exaggerated sigh. The self-proclaimed queen of the yacht club, her entire persona was built on exclusivity, on making sure people like her were the gatekeepers of luxury. Her sharp blue eyes raked over Shaq, taking in his crisp linen shirt, expensive but casual. Not flashy, just confident. That made it worse. He wasn't even trying to impress them. Madeline turned to her group of equally polished socialites who sipped their champagne with amused smirks. First, they let in reality stars, then tech bros, and now, she gestured dramatically toward Shaq. "I mean, what is that doing here?" Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. "You talking to me?" Madeline scoffed, looking him up and down. "I don't see anyone else around here lowering the property value." A few people gasped softly. Others snickered behind their glasses. Shaq just grinned. "Oh, so you're a comedian now?" She arched a perfectly shaped brow. "This is a private club. We have standards." "Standards, huh?" Shaq's deep voice carried effortlessly over the dock. "Let me guess. Money? Status? Connections?" Madeline waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, sweetheart, it's not just about money. It's about heritage, tradition, class." Shaq tilted his head. "And who decided you get to make those rules?" Madeline smirked. "People like me." She turned to a nearby staff member, a young man in a white polo and khakis who already looked nervous. "Get security." The worker hesitated. Ma'am, I don't think—" "I wasn't asking," she snapped. Then with a dramatic snap of her fingers, she added, "Call security. Now." Shaq let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Wow, you really think you run this place, huh?" Madeline folded her arms, lips curling into a smug smile. "Oh, I don't think, big guy. I know." A uniformed security guard approached, looking uncertain. Shaq didn't move. He just smiled. This was about to get interesting. The security guard hesitated for a split second before straightening his stance. He was a tall man, fit, mid-40s, probably ex-military, but even he looked unsure about how to handle this situation. "Sir," the guard said carefully, keeping his voice low, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a private club." Shaq didn't move, didn't blink, just smiled. "Oh yeah? On whose orders?" Before the guard could answer, another voice cut through the tension. "That would be mine." A man in a navy blazer and crisp white slacks strode toward them, his polished loafers clicking against the wooden dock. A gold name tag gleamed on his lapel. Edward Langston, club manager. Langston forced a polite smile. "Mr. O'Neill, I presume?" Shaq nodded. "That's me." Langston adjusted his blazer, clearing his throat. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. You see, this is a members-only establishment." Shaq nodded, acting thoughtful. "Cool, cool. So where do I sign up?" Langston blinked, momentarily thrown off. "Excuse me. You said it's members only. So where do I pay my dues? Get a key card? That kind of thing." A snicker ran through the crowd. Madeline, who had been watching with her arms crossed, rolled her eyes. "You really think it works like that?" She gestured at the rows of yachts, the impeccably dressed guests, the quiet, controlled opulence of the club. "You can't just buy your way in. This place is about tradition. It takes generations of wealth to belong here." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Oh, so it's not about money?" Of course it is, Madeline scoffed. But it's also about class. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. Right, class. The same class that lets people like you decide who belongs and who doesn't? Langston cleared his throat. Mr. O'Neill, I'm sure you understand. Nah, I get it, Shaq interrupted, casually pulling out his phone. Good to know. Let me make a quick call. Langston frowned. Madeline smirked. But the second Shaq dialed, the smirk vanished. Shaq lifted his phone, his massive fingers effortlessly scrolling through his contacts. The mood on the dock had shifted. What was once smug amusement had turned into something sharper. Unease. Hey, man, remember that favor you owe me? Shaq said. His voice relaxed, but there was an unmistakable edge behind his words. Madeline let out a dramatic sigh, arms crossed. Oh, please, who are you calling? Your little basketball buddies. She laughed, tossing her platinum hair over her shoulder. Shaq didn't even look at her. He just smirked. Nah, he said, locking eyes with the club manager, Langston. Just the guy who owns this place. The doc went silent. Langston stiffened. Wait, what? Shaq lifted his phone to his ear. Yeah, I'm at your yacht club right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I thought. He chuckled. Want to handle this for me? Langston's entire demeanor shifted. His confidence, his carefully curated air of superiority, it all flickered. Madeline, however, still wasn't convinced. She let out another condescending laugh. Oh, how adorable. You really expect us to believe you just happen to know the owner. She turned to Langston. Don't let him bluff you. He's obviously making this up. Langston didn't respond, because his phone had just started ringing. The color drained from his face as he slowly reached for it, staring at the caller ID like it might explode in his hand. Madeline frowned, her confidence flickering for the first time. Langston, why aren't you answering? Shaq leaned down slightly, lowering his voice just enough for her to hear. Go on, sweetheart. Pick up the call. Langston's fingers trembled as he answered. Mr. Hastings. Sir, He stopped. A voice on the other end barked something that made his entire posture stiffen. Yes, sir. I understand, sir. Right away. He turned back to Shaq, face pale. Mr. O'Neill, sir. The owner would like me to extend his personal apologies. You're welcome here anytime. Madeline's smug grin vanished. What? Langston cleared his throat, still avoiding her gaze. In fact, he insists that you be treated as an honored guest. The wealthy onlookers murmured. Some even started chuckling. Shaq's smirk widened. Oh, so now I belong here? Madeline's face turned an angry shade of red. No, this is ridiculous. I don't care who he knows. He's still not one of us. Langston shot her a panicked look. Miss Sinclair, I really don't think... I don't care what you think, Madeline hissed. She turned back to Shaq, jabbing a manicured finger at him. You don't belong here, and I don't care who you called. You think a phone call changes anything? Shaq raised an eyebrow. Well, considering the owner just overruled your little power trip? He checked his watch. Yeah, I'd say it changes everything. Madeline was seething. But then, an idea struck her. A last-ditch effort to maintain control. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her expensive silk blouse. Then, with an exaggerated smirk, she turned to the rest of the club members. Fine, she purred. You can stay. But let's see if you really belong. Shaq folded his arms. Oh, yeah? And how are we doing that? Madeline gestured toward the sparkling blue water where million-dollar yachts were lined up. Simple, she said, her voice oozing with confidence. We race. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. All right, but if I win, I get something even better. Langston clutched his phone tightly, nodding rapidly, as a deep voice barked instructions on the other end. His usual cool, polished demeanor had completely crumbled. Yes, sir. I understand, sir, he stammered. Right away. Every set of eyes on the dock was locked onto him, waiting. The tension in the air felt thick enough to slice. Langston swallowed hard, turned to Shaq, and forced a strained smile. Mr. O'Neill, you're, invited to stay as long as you'd like. The club extends its warmest welcome. A hushed wave of gasps and murmurs rippled through the elite crowd. Madeline froze, her manicured fingers clenched around the stem of her champagne glass, knuckles turning white. What? She blurted, her voice sharper than before. Langston's forced smile barely held. The owner has personally approved your stay. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Oh, so now I belong here? His deep voice carried across the dock, sending a ripple of amusement through the guests. A few onlookers chuckled, some whispering amongst themselves. Others looked at Madeline, waiting for her response. Her lips pressed into a thin line. This wasn't supposed to happen. He wasn't supposed to win. You can't be serious, she snapped at Langston. Langston shifted uncomfortably, his collar suddenly feeling too tight. I'm afraid the owner's decision is final, Ms. Sinclair. Madeline let out a short, bitter laugh. Oh, so that's it. He makes one little phone call and suddenly he's one of us. Shaq smirked. You keep saying one of us. You mean Rich? He took a slow step toward her, lowering his voice just enough for only her to hear. Because, sweetheart, I passed Rich a long time ago. The words hit her like a slap. She straightened her shoulders, tilting her chin up, trying to maintain control. Money isn't everything, she hissed. Shaq chuckled. Now you tell me. The crowd laughed at that one, some outright, some quietly behind hands or glasses of champagne. Madeline's face burned. This wasn't just an inconvenience anymore. This was public humiliation, and it was only getting worse. Shaq turned to Langston, still smirking. So, now that I'm invited to stay, how about a little fun? Madeline narrowed her eyes. What kind of fun? Shaq gestured toward the private marina, where dozens of luxury yachts bobbed in the water. How about a race? The club members perked up. Madeline blinked, momentarily thrown off. You want a race? Shaq shrugged. Unless, of course, you're scared. A hush fell over the crowd. Madeline never backed down from a challenge, and Shaq knew it. Her jaw tightened. Fine, she said, voice dripping with confidence. But let's make it interesting. She stepped forward, a smirk creeping back onto her face. Loser leaves the club. Forever. Shaq didn't flinch. He stood there, arms crossed, towering over Madeline as she sneered at him, still desperate to regain control. The tension on the dock was electric. Every guest, every club member, even the staff, they were locked in, waiting to see what would happen next. Let me get this straight, Shaq said, his deep voice carrying easily over the hushed crowd. You want to race me on the water? Madeline smirked, flipping her blonde hair over her shoulder. That's right. A yacht race. Only real members of this club compete in it every year. A murmur rippled through the crowd. The annual yacht race was the event of the season. Only the wealthiest, most elite members participated. Shaq chuckled, shaking his head. So, let me guess. If I lose, I get kicked out, right? Madeline's smirk widened. Exactly. If you lose, you leave this club forever. No buying your way in. No phone calls to the owner. No second chances. The tension spiked. The stakes had just gone through the roof. Langston, still standing nervously beside Shaq, cleared his throat. Ms. Sinclair, this isn't exactly how we... She shot him a glare that shut him up instantly. Shaq rubbed his chin, pretending to consider. Okay, but what do I get when I win? The way he said it made the crowd stir. He wasn't doubting himself. He was sure. Madeline's confidence faltered for half a second, but she covered it with a laugh. When? Oh, that's cute. You really think you're going to win? Shaq grinned. Oh, sweetheart, I know I'm going to win. The question is, what do I get when I do? Madeline's expression twisted, but she kept up the act. Fine, she said, rolling her eyes. You want a prize? Name it. Shaq looked around, his gaze drifting to the massive, sleek white yacht docked at the end of the marina. It was Madeline's, the crown jewel of the yacht club. A slow smile spread across his face. If I win, I get your yacht. The entire crowd gasped. Madeline's smirk vanished. You're joking, she said, eyes narrowing. Shaq shrugged. You said it yourself. This is about proving who belongs here, right? He took a step closer. Unless you're scared, Madeline bristled. Scared? Her? In front of all these people? Please, she scoffed, forcing a laugh. I'm the best sailor in this club. You don't stand a chance. Cool, Shaq said, holding out his hand. Then we got a deal? The crowd held its breath. Madeline hesitated. Her yacht was worth millions. It was her pride. But she had backed herself into a corner, and now everyone was watching. She snatched his hand and shook it hard. Deal! The club erupted with excitement. The biggest race in club history was officially on. The air crackled with tension. Every eye on the dock was locked onto Shaq and Madeline, their standoff more intense than the summer sun overhead. Shaq leaned forward slightly, his deep voice carrying over the hushed crowd. If I win, I get your yacht. Gasps, whispers, shock. Madeline's perfectly manicured fingers clenched into fists. She blinked like she hadn't heard him right. Excuse me. Shaq shrugged, completely unfazed. You heard me. The entire yacht club held its breath. This wasn't just a race anymore. This was war. Madeline's expression twisted in disbelief. You think you can just waltz in here and take my yacht? Do you even know what it's worth? Shaq smirked. A whole lot. But don't worry. I'll take good care of it. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Some guests, the ones who had spent years under Madeline's reign, looked delighted at the idea of her finally getting a taste of her own medicine. Her jaw tightened. This is ridiculous. You don't even own a yacht. Shaq crossed his arms. Not yet. More murmurs. Even Langston, the nervous club manager, looked intrigued. Madeline was fuming. She had trapped herself. If she backed down now, she'd look like a coward. But if she accepted, she was risking the one thing she valued more than anything, her status. Fine, she snapped, lifting her chin. I accept. Another wave of gasps. Shaq grinned. That's the spirit. Madeline folded her arms. But let's make one thing clear. I'm not losing. Shaq chuckled. You sound real confident for someone who's shaking. Madeline was shaking, but not from fear. From rage. I hope you like humiliation, O'Neill, because that's all you're getting today. Shaq tilted his head. We'll see. Langston cleared his throat, stepping forward awkwardly. Well then, I suppose the terms are set. The race will begin at noon tomorrow. Shaq nodded. Perfect. Madeline smirked. Good. Gives you time to practice losing. Shaq smiled, completely unfazed. Or for you to practice handing over your yacht. Madeline spun on her heel and stormed off, the expensive heels of her designer shoes clacking against the dock. As she disappeared, the entire club buzzed. This was about to be the most explosive race the club had ever seen. The horn blasted. The race was on. Madeline's pristine white yacht lunged forward, slicing through the waves with an effortless grace that only true wealth could buy. The elite spectators on the dock erupted into cheers, clinking champagne glasses as they watched the spectacle unfold. She stood at the helm, smirking, the wind tugging at her designer scarf. Her crew moved like a well-oiled machine, adjusting the sails, trimming the lines, optimizing every detail for maximum speed. She turned her head just enough to see Shaq. He stood on his rented yacht, arms folded, calm as ever. No yelling, no scrambling, just watching. You're in over your head, big guy, she called out. Shaq chuckled, adjusting his sunglasses. That's funny. You sure you don't want to say goodbye to your yacht instead? Madeline's smirk widened. Fool. He doesn't stand a chance. Her yacht gained speed, cutting through the water like a knife. Shaq's boat, surprisingly, kept up. Her fingers curled around the railing. Impossible. She turned to her captain. Faster. The crew obeyed, adjusting the sails. The yacht surged forward, leaving behind a white trail of foam. But still, Shaq was right there. His yacht, his crew, his entire presence. Steady, unbothered. The club members watching from the dock murmured in confusion. This was supposed to be a humiliation, not a competition. Madeline's jaw clenched. Then, a sharp jolt. Shaq's yacht shuddered. The sails flapped wildly. The speed plummeted. Something was wrong. Shaq's crew scrambled. We're losing power, one of them shouted. Shaq's gaze flickered to the water. And then he saw it. A figure slipping beneath the waves. One of Madeline's loyal club members. Sabotage. Madeline, miles ahead, glanced back and saw Shaq's yacht struggling. She grinned. Shaq? He just laughed. Coolly, he pulled a small radio from his pocket. All right, boy, he said, his voice unshaken, amused. Roll in. A massive super yacht appeared on the horizon, barreling toward them, cutting through the ocean like a titan, and it had Shaq's name written all over it. We're losing power, one of Shaq's crew members shouted, panic in his voice. The sails of Shaq's yacht fluttered wildly, the wind no longer carrying them forward. The once smooth momentum of the boat dragged to a near halt, as if an invisible hand had clamped down on it. Madeline, standing at the helm of her pristine luxury yacht, smirked as she watched the scene unfold behind her. Perfect. She had paid a club member, a diver, to disable Shaq's yacht mid-race. And just like that, he was dead in the water. Well, well, she purred, gripping the wheel. Guess you don't belong after all. From the dock, the wealthy spectators murmured among themselves. Some cheered. Others exchanged glances, confused. Something felt off. Shaq, standing at the center of his struggling yacht, didn't look concerned. Not one bit. He adjusted his sunglasses. Then he laughed. His crew looked at him in disbelief. Uh, boss? We're kind of losing here. Shaq smirked. Nah, we're just getting started. Madeline's smile faltered. Shaq pulled a sleek black radio from his pocket. He held it up lazily, as if he had all the time in the world. Go ahead, boys. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a roaring hum vibrated across the open water. Spectators gasped. Some pointed toward the horizon. And then it appeared. A massive super yacht. It cut through the ocean like a titan, its sleek white hull glistening in the sun. The wake behind it sent waves crashing against everything in its path. It was a floating palace, towering over every other yacht in the club. And emblazoned on the side? Shaquille O'Neal. The gasps turned into shocked exclamations. Madeline's heart slammed against her ribs. Wow, what the hell? She stammered. Shaq grinned. You see, Maddie, I came prepared. Her fingers clenched around the wheel. How did you? Shaq shrugged. I knew you'd try something shady, so I brought a little backup. The super yacht pulled up alongside them, casting a shadow over her so-called elite vessel. The onboard crew, all dressed in crisp white uniforms, began lowering a luxury speedboat. Shaq calmly stepped onto it, as if this was all part of his plan. Be right back, he told his stunned crew. The speedboat tore through the water, cutting the distance between him and Madeline in seconds. Madeline's hands trembled as she watched him approach. This wasn't just a race anymore. This was humiliation. The crowd on the dock erupted in wild cheers. Shaq pulled up next to her yacht, standing tall, towering over her. You were saying? He called out. Madeline's face twisted with frustration. This isn't fair. Shaq chuckled. Neither is cheating, but here we are. Her face paled. People were watching, recording, whispering. Shaq tapped his radio again. Time to expose some folks. A deep voice crackled over the radio. We caught something on camera. Sending it now. Madeline stiffened. What did they see? The ocean stretched endless and calm, the sun casting golden reflections on the waves. The cheers from the dock rang in Madeline's ears. But they weren't for her. Her fingers clenched around the yacht's wheel. She had this race in the bag. Shaq's boat was barely moving, just as planned. She turned slightly, peering back over her shoulder at his yacht, only to confirm what she already knew. His vessel was slowing down. A victorious smirk curled on her lips. He's dead in the water, one of her crew members muttered, adjusting the sails. Madeline chuckled, raising her glass of vintage Dom Perignon. What a shame, the dockside crowd murmured, some pointing at Shaq's yacht. They couldn't see the sabotage at play, but they could see the outcome. Guess he didn't belong here after all, she mused, swirling the champagne in her glass. Then, the air changed. A low, thunderous hum rolled across the water, subtle at first, then growing into something impossible to ignore. Her brows furrowed. One of her crew members stumbled forward, catching himself on the railing. What the hell is that? The champagne glass stopped at her lips. She hadn't taken a sip yet. A few of the wealthiest club members, the ones who had seen everything, gasped from the dock. Madeline turned, scanning the horizon, and then she saw it. A massive shadow cut through the water, larger than anything that had ever graced the club's private docks. Its towering white hull gleamed like a polished pearl, casting long, dark streaks on the ocean surface. The dock fell silent. Her breath caught. The club's biggest yacht, the one that belonged to the original founders, the one that was never for sale. And yet Shaquille O'Neal stood on its deck like he had owned it for years. He held a radio to his lips, his deep voice smooth, amused. That's cute, Maddie, but I came prepared. Madeline's entire body went rigid. The crowd erupted. Some were screaming in shock, others laughing. Phones were held up, cameras rolling. Madeline's hand trembled as she gripped her champagne glass. She had just humiliated Shaq in front of everyone. She had ensured his yacht wouldn't finish. And now, he had just outplayed her without moving an inch. Her voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. That's not possible. One of her crew members stared at her in horror. Did he just? Shaq grinned, waving. You see, Maddie, I don't need to race. His voice was casual, confident, completely unbothered. Because I just bought the biggest yacht in this club. Gasps, laughter. One of the club's senior members whispered, "That yacht's been owned by the Hastings family for decades." Another blurted, "It was never for sale." Madeline's vision blurred. Her throat tightened. Number no. She had spent years making herself the queen of this club. She dictated who belonged. She controlled the social order. And now in one afternoon, this man, this outsider, had flipped everything upside down. She felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on her, watching, judging. Shaq leaned over the rail of his yacht, arms folded, watching her slowly unravel. His grin was maddeningly relaxed. "Nice little boat you got there," he called. "Want to race again? Or should I just tow you back to shore?" The crowd roared. Some clapped, others whistled. Madeline's nails dug into her palm. Her heartbeat pounded. Her world was spinning. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Her hands shook. The champagne glass wobbled between her fingers. Crack. The delicate crystal snapped in half, shards tumbling into the sea. The golden liquid dripped down her arm like liquid gold. The dock went silent. Every pair of eyes swung back to her. Then, Madeline snapped. PED. She turned, grabbed a nearby chair, and hurled it into the ocean. Gasps filled the air. Had she just lost it? The world around her blurred. The sound of waves, once calming, now felt mocking. The club's members, once her loyal subjects, now whispered behind perfectly manicured hands. Madeline stood frozen on the deck of her yacht, her pulse hammering against her temples. Shaq's grinning face loomed in her periphery, leaning casually against the railing of his newly acquired super yacht. "You cheated," a deep voice cut through the murmurs. Madeline turned sharply. It was Charles Whitmore, the club owner, a man who had once praised her family's legacy, the same man who had now stepped forward with an expression colder than the ocean breeze. Her heart dropped. He held his phone up, shaking his head as he scrolled. "There's footage of your crew tampering with Shaq's yacht. Multiple angles. People are already posting it." Her breath hitched. She turned toward the dock. Dozens of people had their phones raised, recording. Some even live streaming. A woman whispered, "This is worse than that influencer who got banned from Milan Fashion Week." A man chuckled. "Her reputation is done." Madeline's throat went dry. She forced a laugh, flipping her hair over her shoulder. "Charles, darling, you know me. This is ridiculous." Charles didn't blink. "It's not ridiculous. It's an embarrassment." Madeline twitched. "You can't be serious." "Dead serious?" He adjusted the cuffs of his $10,000 suit. "I warned you before. This club has standards." That word, standards. It had been her weapon for years. Now it was a loaded gun aimed at her. Shaq, still lounging, let out a low chuckle. "Tough break, Maddie." She spun toward him, her face flushing with rage. "You did this." Shaq raised a brow. "I just showed up to enjoy the race. You're the one who got caught." Her fingernails dug into her palms. Charles exhaled sharply. "Effective immediately. Your membership is revoked." The dock erupted. Madeline's eyes widened. "Excuse me." "You're out," Charles repeated louder this time. "And so is your family." Her stomach churned. This club was everything. She built her entire status here. And now, gone. "You can't do this," she snapped. "I'm the Sinclair legacy." Charles, unmoved, waved toward the security guards. "Escort her out." Madeline's lungs tightened. Number. The crowd parted as the two uniformed guards stepped forward. "Don't touch me!" she shrieked, stumbling back. Shaq watched, arms folded, as the guards firmly gripped her arms. "You should have stayed in your lane," he said coolly. Madeline thrashed. "Let go!" "I am not going anywhere." Her voice echoed across the marina. Phones zoomed in. Cameras flashed. She wasn't just losing the club. She was becoming a meme. Security let her off the yacht, her designer heels clicking against the wooden dock. Her head spun, her vision blurred. And then someone laughed, loud, mocking. Then another, and another. By the time she reached the gates, half the crowd was laughing. The club's elite, her world, had turned against her. Madeline Sinclair had fallen. She storms off, face burning with humiliation, as a new notification pops up on her phone. Shea Q's win is trending #1 worldwide. The dock was still buzzing. Whispers, laughter. Stunned faces watching the fallout of Madeline Sinclair's spectacular downfall. Shaq stood at the edge of his newly won yacht, the wind ruffling his crisp white shirt. It was his now. But instead of reveling in the victory, he turned back to the stunned crowd and did something no one expected. Shaq grabbed the mic from the event announcer and let out a deep chuckle. "Man, that was fun," he said, his voice booming across the marina. "But y'all know me. I don't need another yacht." Gasps, murmurs. Even the waiters holding silver trays of champagne froze in place. Madeline, standing at a distance, her mascara smudged from earlier humiliation, scoffed. "What's he doing now?" Shaq raised a hand. "I've been blessed with a lot in life, and I believe when you're blessed, you bless others." He turned toward the camera crews, the influencers, the rich elites who had spent the night sneering at him. "So I'm donating this yacht to a youth mentorship program," he continued, "for kids who've never even been on a boat before. Let's give them something to dream about." The crowd erupted. People clapped, cheered. Some even jumped up from their seats. Even Charles Whitmore, the club's owner, grinned. "Now that's class," he murmured to himself. But the loudest reaction? Madeline, her face twisted in rage. "You're joking," she spat. "You're giving my yacht away?" Shaq turned, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Not your yacht anymore, Maddie. You lost, remember?" She clenched her fists so tight, her nails dug into her palms. "You did this just to embarrass me," Shaq chuckled. "Nah, you did that to yourself." He stepped off the yacht, giving a playful pat to its side. "But don't worry. At least now it'll be used for something good." Madeline's breath hitched. Her entire reputation, built on exclusivity, on her family name, on being untouchable, had crumbled. And the worst part? She couldn't do a damn thing about it. Madeline's phone dings. She glances down. In a Shaq flex is trending worldwide. And at the top, a video of her epic loss, already at 10 million views. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting a golden glow across the marina. Glasses clinked. Laughter rippled through the yacht club. Shaq was the man of the hour. From the deck of his newly acquired yacht, he watched the celebration unfold. Members who had once judged him now toasted in his honor. "To Shaq!" someone cheered, raising a glass of champagne. "To the newest yacht club legend!" another voice added. Shaq grinned, leaning casually against the railing. He wasn't the type to gloat, but man, this was satisfying. Across the dock, Madeline Sinclair stood motionless. Her lips were pressed into a thin, furious line. Arms crossed so tightly her manicured nails dug into her palms. This wasn't just a loss. It was public humiliation. She had spent years making sure people like Shaq never stepped foot in her world. And now, he had not only won, he had taken her yacht, her pride, and the respect of the entire club. Her phone buzzed violently. New notifications flooded in. Shaq Flex is trending worldwide. 10.2 million views. Rich woman gets humbled after trying to kick out Shaq. SportsCenter reposted the video with the caption, "Game over." Madeline's stomach twisted. Her family name, her influence, it was all crumbling. She turned back towards Shaq, who was watching her with pure amusement. His towering frame radiated confidence. He didn't even have to say anything. His victory was written all over his face. Finally, he spoke. "Maybe next time, don't judge a book by its cover." He winked. Madeline felt her face burn. Laughter erupted from the crowd. She whipped around, grabbing her bag, shoving past people. She had to get out of here. Meanwhile, Shaq turned back to his crew. "All right, let's take this thing for a spin." The massive yacht pulled away from the dock, slicing through the water like it had always belonged to him. And in a way, it had. As Shaq sailed into the sunset, the club members cheered. Madeline? She was left on the dock, watching her legacy sink.